event. Radio Algeria International, our voice in the world.
This is the English service of Radio Algeria International. It's time for the news.
Prime Minister Nadir Arbawi has said from Seville, Spain, that the 4th International Conference of Financing for Development comes amid an international context marked by several issues that require common efforts, notably the situation in the Middle East. Algeria has called from New York for the conference on the two-state solution to be the starting point for a serious action leading to the establishment of a Palestinian state with Al-Quds as its capital. The Israeli occupation army has pursued its attacks on the Gaza Strip, killing at least 19 Palestinians and wounding scores of others. Hello and welcome on Radio Algeria International. I'm Mariam Bershi. Since his swearing-in ceremony to the Supreme Magistracy in December 2019, President Abdelmajid Tebboune has committed Algeria to a thorough transformation in line with the hopes of a people for renewal. Asya Bekkar has the details.
In a context marked by an unprecedented crisis of trust between those in power and those being governed, by Algeria's downgrading on the international stage, the coming into office of the head of state marked the start of a transformation that some no longer hesitate to describe as radical on the political, diplomatic and economic fronts alike. Heir to a country awakened by the popular movement of 2019 and the institutional lethargy of previous years, Abdelmajid Tebboune has, within 6 years, succeeded in reconnecting the weakened link between the state and its citizens and restoring the people's central place in the institutional edifice. The revision of the constitution adopted by referendum established a new balance of power, consolidating rights and freedoms while affirming the principle of popular sovereignty as the key of the national project. For many, this approach rehabilitates the oath of November 1st, 1954 and the spirit of an Algeria proud of its revolutionary roots, sacralizing the heroic battles of the past but resolutely looking to the future. The challenge of the post-hydrocarbon era is undoubtedly one of the major projects of the Tebboune era. In a country that has long been a prisoner of oil revenues, the revival of industry, the modernization of agriculture, and support for non-hydrocarbon experts bear witness to a clear determination to establish a diversified economy that will generate wealth and jobs. Today, Algeria has a GDP growth rate of 4.2%, a performance hailed by many analysts and international financial institutions as a tangible sign of resilience and recovery. At the same time, non-hydrocarbon exports continue to grow, reaching almost $7 billion, a historic move that confirms the country's ability to make a real economic shift and build an economy that will benefit future generations. President Tebboune is also investing in knowledge and innovation as key levers for sustainable development. Regarding diplomacy, Algeria has regained its voice, faithful to its unswerving principles. The country is once again asserting itself as a peacemaker and mediator, a conciliatory power in a world where certainties are wavering and great principles are being eroded. From the Sahel to the Mediterranean, from the Palestinian question to the defense of African causes, Algeria is fully assuming its role as a regional power, free to make its own choices and adopt its own positions. Although much remains to be done, hopes remain high for Algeria as in less than 6 years it managed to secure the involvement of youth in shaping their own destiny. The president is rebuilding a state in which the citizen is a key player in his own prosperity.
Prime Minister Nadir Arbawi has said from Seville, Spain, that the 4th International Conference of Financing for Development comes amid an international context marked by several issues that require common efforts, notably the situation in the Middle East. Speaking during the meeting, the Algerian Premier and representative of President Abdelmajid Tebboune said the current international financial system is facing the challenge of resolving serious issues, notably the Israeli war on Gaza and climate change.
This fourth conference on financing for development is being held within an international context characterized by a widening development gap between countries, the increasing burden of debt, the repercussions of climate change, and the escalation of conflicts and wars, including those taking place in the Middle East, especially in occupied Palestine and in war-torn Gaza, which is facing a war of extermination targeting the brotherly Palestinian people rights to establish their independent state with Jerusalem as its capital. In the midst of these turbulent and complex political and economic conditions, we look forward to this conference being a turning point for moving to a new phase of collective action by formulating practical outcomes to reconsider the international financial system, which is no longer able to keep pace with the current fundamental changes.
Regarding sustainable development in Africa, the Algerian premier said Algeria has made of sustainable development and international solidarity major pillars of its foreign policy.
Algeria has made of sustainable development and international solidarity two basic pillars of its foreign policy, which is embodied in its continuous contribution to supporting development efforts in the African continent, as well as its full involvement in embodying continental integration through many projects. Meanwhile, my country is currently working through the Algerian Agency of International Cooperation to contribute to supporting infrastructure, health, education and energy in many African countries, for which it has allocated no less than $1 billion.
He added that Africa's debts are the main obstacle to its development, which require alleviating this burden for the best interest of the continent.
Africa's mounting external debt is one of the biggest obstacles that burden its countries, which requires launching urgent initiatives to address this dilemma, particularly through debt alleviation and full debt relief for some countries. In this regard, we support the project to establish an international framework aimed at filling gaps in the debt structure and proposing practical options to address the debt burden. I also call for finding urgent solutions to the bias in affiliation classification that imposes a heavy cost on many countries on the continent, which requires adopting more transparent and fair methods for affiliation classification. In this context, we expressed our satisfaction at the establishment of an independent African agency for affiliation classification.
On the sidelines of the Algerian premier's participation to the International Conference of Financing for Development, he discussed with the Palestinian State's Prime Minister, Minister of Foreign Affairs and Expatriates of the State of Palestine, Mohammed Mustafa, the situation in the occupied Palestinian territories. The details with Jamal Salmani.
The Palestinian premier praised President Tebboun's consistent and honorable stance in support of the Palestinian cause. The two officials discussed the latest developments in the occupied Palestinian territories, particularly in the Gaza Strip, subjected to an Israeli brutal genocidal war against the brotherly Palestinian people, reaffirming that allowing the Palestinian people to establish their independent state with Al-Quds as its capital remains the only solution to restore stability and security in the region. Separately, Mr. Al-Arabawi discussed with the head of the Tunisian government, Sarah Zafrani Zanzari, the privileged relations existing between the two brotherly countries in accordance with the shared will of the leaders of both countries. The two parties also examined bilateral activities and programs, emphasizing the importance of implementing them to raise cooperation to higher levels. Their talks also addressed the current regional and international situation, with both parties emphasizing the convergence of views between the two countries and the need for continued coordination to address common challenges.
The Minister of State in charge of Foreign Affairs, the National Community Abroad and African Affairs, Ahmed Hattaf, has received the Secretary General of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Italy, Riccardo Gariglia, who is on a working visit to Algeria as part of the fourth session of strategic dialogue between the two countries. Ms. Hodsharfi reports.
During the meeting, they examined the conclusions of the fourth session of bilateral strategic dialogue, co-chaired by the Italian officials and the Secretary General of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Lunas Megraman. The meeting was also an opportunity to highlight the positive results achieved in consolidating the Algerian-Italian partnership and to stress the need to give an impetus to the existing privileged partnership as part of the preparations for the forthcoming high-level bilateral meetings. Earlier, the Secretary General of the Foreign Affairs Ministry, Lunas Megraman, and his Italian counterpart, Riccardo Gargaglia, co-chaired the fourth session of the Algerian-Italian Strategic Dialogue on Bilateral Relations and Global Political and Security Issues, as part of the strengthening of the strategic partnership between the two countries. The session of strategic dialogue, which is part of the regular political consultations held between the two countries, was an opportunity to hold comprehensive and constructive assessment of the state of bilateral cooperation in various fields and to examine the progress made since the last session was held in Rome in 2024. The meeting was part of the preparations for the 5th Algerian-Italian Government Summit, chaired by President of the Republic Mr. Abdelmajid Tebboune and the President of the Council of Ministers of the Italian Republic, Mrs. Giorgia Meloni, scheduled to take place in the Italian capital at the end of July. On the occasion, the two parties exchanged views on regional and international issues of common concern, highlighting the convergence of views existing between the two countries, notably regarding the developments in the situation in Palestine, Western Sahara, Libya and the Sahel region.
The Interior Minister, Mr. Brahim Marred, has received here in Algiers the Swiss Minister of Justice and Police, Mr. Bichand, who is on a working visit to Algeria. The details with Jamil Salmani.
The discussions focused on how to strengthen the state of cooperation between the two parties and way to strengthen and raise cooperation to the level of the strong historical relations linking Algeria and the Swiss Confederation. Mr. Marad highlighted that the meeting aimed to boost Algerian-Swiss cooperation, particularly in fighting crime, with the setting up of a new joint working group to ensure tangible results.
This meeting falls within the well-known cooperation between Algeria and Switzerland, a cooperation that naturally covers several sectors. However, the visit of the Swiss Minister of Justice and Police is mainly part of a dynamic of fighting crime in all of its forms. The goal is to further strengthen this cooperation. Today, an agreement was reached to establish a joint and permanent working group that will lead to concrete results.
Earlier, the Swiss Minister of Justice and Police, Mr. Bichans, was received by the Secretary of State to the Minister of Foreign Affairs in charge of the national community abroad, Mr. Sofiane Shaib, with whom he examined the historic relations existing between the two countries and ways of mutually beneficial cooperation. Outside the meeting, the two sides presided over the signing ceremony of a declaration of intent to set up a permanent mechanism for exchange on migration-related issues, with the aim of sharing the exchanging expertise and best practices in this field. In a statement made following the signing ceremony, Mr. Shaib affirmed that the declaration aims to institutionalize the Algerian-Swiss dialogue on migration through regular exchanges of expertise and best practices.
This declaration of intent, signed at the headquarters of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, constitutes a concrete step in the implementation of one of the recommendations resulting from the Algerian-Swiss dialogue meeting on migration issues held last year in Bern. It is a document aimed primarily at institutionalizing this dialogue in order to share expertise, exchange experiences, and the best practices regarding migration-related issues. This is done through regular dialogues and meetings, as well as an exchange of successful experiences between the two countries.
For his part, the Swiss Minister of Justice and Police highlighted the close cooperation between Algeria and Switzerland in the field of migration and police cooperation, with both countries working as partners driven by a sincere will to strengthen cooperation.
The Speaker of the People's National Assembly, Mr. Brahim Boughali, has stressed the need to modernize the national legislative system in order to adapt to technological developments and to ensure a balance between the protection of rights and freedoms on one hand and the repression of cybercrime on the other hand. Mr. Boghali also stressed the need to address artificial intelligence challenges, urging for a national dialogue and forward-looking laws that protect digital sovereignty while respecting rights. He emphasized the Army's key role in defending both national borders and cyberspace amid growing digital threats.
At a time when crime is no longer confined to borders and has begun to penetrate information networks, target digital infrastructure and sovereign institutions, and even affect sovereignty itself through focused cyber attacks, the vital and strategic role of the People's National Army, heir to the National Liberation Army, has emerged, not only in protecting the nation's borders from traditional threats, but also as a key player in the cyber defense system.
Mr. Boghali praised the Army and security services for their achievements in the field of cybersecurity, citing strong political will and long-term planning focused on protecting citizens, state institutions, and national sovereignty. Algeria has called from New York for the conference on the two-state solution to be the starting point for a serious action leading to the establishment of a Palestinian state with Al-Quds as its capital. The details in this report with Masoud Sharfi.
Speaking before the UN Security Council at its monthly meeting on the situation in the Middle East and the Palestinian question, Algeria's Deputy Permanent Representative to the United Nations, Mr. Tawfiq El-Eid Koudri, said that finding a solution to the Palestinian question is an urgent necessity.
The question of Palestine, before it is buried, although this seems elusive, it is in fact resolving the Palestinian issue is an urgent necessity, not only to enable the Palestinian people of exercising their inalienable rights, but to protect the international order. Therefore, we must all realize this truth and work to realize it, and let the conference on the two-state solution be a starting point for a serious and credible process that leads to the establishment of a Palestinian state with Jerusalem as its capital.
The Algerian diplomat stressed that civilized nations resort to law, while those that use force adopt to the law of the jungle, where the strongest eat the weakest. Thus, he said, we are facing a total disregard for international law in the Middle East due to the Zionist occupiers exceeding its limits, which constitute the main obstacle to the achievement of peace in the Middle East.
You're still listening to Radio Algeria International. During the meeting in New York, the Assistant Secretary General for the Middle East, Asia and the Pacific, Mr. Khalid Khiari, has expressed concern about the massive killing of the Palestinians by the Israeli occupation forces and the attacks of Zionist settlers under the protection of the occupiers' troops in the occupied West Bank.
We remain deeply concerned by Israeli military operations in Gaza that render large areas of Gaza uninhabitable. We reject the forced displacement of the Palestinian population from any part of the occupied Palestinian territory, which would constitute the breach of international law obligations. Following almost 80 days of Israeli denial of entry of all humanitarian and commercial supplies into Gaza, supplies have started to enter Gaza at wholly inadequate levels, which do not meet the massive needs of the population. We call upon Israel to fulfill its obligation under international law and allow the rapid and unimpeded passages of humanitarian relief for civilians in need. We strongly condemn the loss of lives and injuries of Palestinians seeking aid in Gaza, and we call for an immediate and independent investigation into these events and for perpetrators to be held accountable.
For his part, the representative of the United Kingdom has condemned the Israeli settlement expansion and the Zionist settlers' violence, calling for accountability for the killing of aid workers by the occupation forces.
We have repeatedly called for credible Israeli investigations into Israel's killing of aid workers, including World Central Kitchen, the Palestinian Red Crescent, and the UNOP strike. Israel must provide accountability for these terrible actions and ensure they are not repeated, in line with its obligations under international law. Finally, amidst the bloodshed in Gaza, the situation in the West Bank is also deteriorating. Israel's withholding of tax revenues appears a deliberate effort to leave the Palestinian Authority crippled and unable to pay salaries. Military operations have displaced over 40,000 people. Just last week, an attack by violent settlers on Kafir Malik led to the killing of 3 Palestinians. We condemn settlement expansion and settler violence, and we demand that the Israeli government puts an immediate end to these unlawful acts. We cannot stand by while the foundations of a two-state solution are systematically dismantled.
That was the UK representative to the United Nations speaking at the UN Security Council meeting on the Middle East, including the Palestinian question. Meanwhile, the Israeli army has pursued its attacks on the Gaza Strip, killing at least 19 Palestinians and wounding scores of others. According to the news agency Wafa, the Israeli bombardments targeted the southern town of Khan Yunis and Jabalia in the northern part of the territory. Yesterday, over 50 Palestinians were killed and scores of others wounded in a series of bombardments that hit mainly Gaza. The Israeli occupying authorities pursued their attacks of aggression despite repeated calls for the enforcement of a ceasefire in the war-torn territory. This came as pro-Palestinian demonstrators rallied in Chicago, urging the US Congress to put an end to its support and to impose an arms embargo on the Israeli occupying authorities. They also urged for a lifting of the Israeli blockade on Gaza. The Security Council has renewed the mandate of the UN Disengagement Observer Force in the Golan Heights for 6 months and requested the Secretary-General to ensure that the force has the required capacity and resources to fulfill its mandate in a safe and secure way. Following the vote, the Deputy Political Coordinator of Algeria's permanent mission to the UN, Mr. Ahmed Sahrawi, has stated that the Zionist entity is no longer even hides its intentions. It proclaims them openly and puts them into practice on the ground through continuous expansion in Syria, crossing the separation zone to infiltrate the Yarmouk Basin and deploy a Mount Hermon known as Jebel al-Sheikh.
My country voted in favor of Resolution 2782 based on its firm belief in the vital role played by the United Nations Disengagement Observer Force in maintaining peace and security in the Middle East, and its conviction that the renewal of the mandate is imperative to prevent the collapse of the fragile stability that is threatened at every moment. My country reiterates its firm position that the occupied Syrian Golan is a Syrian territory and that any occupation of it or any attempt to exchange its legal status is null and void and has no legal effect. We affirm that the Security Council must assume its full responsibilities and that its decisions and interventions must be rooted in reality and aimed at achieving justice, not perpetuating impunity.
That was the Deputy Political Coordinator of Algeria's permanent mission to the UN, Mr. Ahmed Sahrawi. US President Donald Trump has signed an executive order ending many US economic sanctions on Syria following in fulfillment of a promise he made to the country's new interim leader. The White House Press Secretary, Caroline Leavitt, said that the move was designed to promote and support the country's path to stability and peace. Moving to the Sahrawi question, a major human rights watchdog in Washington is raising alarm over a controversial new bill that would designate the Polisario Front of Western Sahara as a foreign terrorist organization. The Global Monitoring Center, an international non-profit based in New York, has sent a formal letter to Senator Chuck Schumer urging Congress to reject the bill, calling it factually flawed, legally unsound and dangerous for U.S. foreign policy. The bill was introduced by Representatives Joe Wilson and Jimmy Panetta. According to the letter, there is no credible evidence linking the Polisario to terrorism or extremist ideologies. In fact, the Polisario has never engaged in terrorist activities in its nearly 50-year struggle for Sahrawi independence from Moroccan occupation. The letter emphasizes that the Polisario Front is internationally recognized by the United Nations and the African Union as the legitimate representative of the Sahrawi people. Western Sahara's independence movement, they note, is rooted in secular moderate values and has maintained open cooperation with international aid groups, including American NGOs, inside Sahrawi refugee camps. Critics of the bill warn that labeling the Polisario Front as terrorists would undermine US diplomacy, sabotage peace talks, and delegitimize Sahrawi people's right to self-determination. It will also complicate humanitarian efforts. That's it for today's news bulletin. Stay tuned on Radio Algeria International.
ليل الزهور حكيتو سلطان من ولاد حام ليل الزهور حكيتو سلطان من ولاد حام